Today, I want to have a more candid, more frank, more realistic conversation about the current state of the hobby. Just video game collecting as a whole as we start to push through 2022. Maybe I'm alone in this, but lately it seems when I browse the internet or I browse YouTube for video game related content, everyone is just sitting there complaining about how much video game collecting sucks in 2022. Be it the prices, the flippers, the scalpers, the resellers, grading games, whatever you want to point your finger at for why video game collecting just isn't good anymore. Something changed, the switch was flipped. And for myself, it's just kind of crazy to see. I've been in the game collecting hobby now for over 10 years, and I can very easily say that collecting now is just as fulfilling as it was 10 years ago, back in 2010. Is it a lot different now? Of course it is. So much about hunting, competition, prices, rarity of stuff. So much has changed in this hobby. Both collecting as a hobby and yourself as a collector aren't going to be static. You're forever going to be subject and at the mercy of a lot of outside influences that you really have no control over, that you can do your best to adapt to or change how you approach certain things, or maybe it'll even just cause you to take a step back and reevaluate what collecting as a hobby means to you. In 2022, it is very possible that collecting video games is simply no longer worth it for you. And that is perfectly okay. I actually think a lot of people don't really get this because so much of our identity is tied to us being collectors that you don't have to collect video games. You don't have to be a collector. But if game collecting really is so horrible now compared to what it used to be, I think we really need to take a look at what game collecting really means or what it even is and see if it has drastically changed from what it used to be. And put in the comment section below if you think that video game collecting sucks now or if you've stopped being a video game collector. How do you feel about the current state of everything? But let's just start by getting a clear definition of what we even mean when we're talking about video game collecting. The actual definition of collect or collecting is simply to bring a bunch of things to one place. That's what it literally is. You just gather a bunch of games at one place. Obviously, we as collectors add a lot more emotion and nuance to this definition. For example, a game store isn't collecting games. They're just kind of rotating through inventory and happen to have a bunch of games in one place. For most of us, when we actually think about collecting, we think about the act of putting together a whole bunch of the same kinds of items for just our personal enjoyment. We have no immediate desire to sell and we'll probably keep those items in our collections for an indefinite amount of time. Simply owning the item makes us happy. How you actually acquire said items has no actual basis on if you're collecting or not. It's more so what happens after acquisition. Many collecting actions are curating, organizing, cleaning, displaying. Who doesn't love seeing a good shelf organized with all games in alphabetical order? Or an entire game room that shows off years of video games from vintage to modern and items that are rare and common and the items that you really love to talk about. It's when we start considering how we go about acquiring these items that it becomes a bit more complicated and where a lot of people start to get angry. To scratch that collecting itch, we all need to acquire new items for the collection. For myself, if I go 3-4 days without buying something, I feel like I need to purchase something, even if it's only 10-20 bucks, just to satisfy that crave. And of course, the amount of places we have to go and look for said games are really kind of endless. From going to some random dank, dark pawn shop on the outsides of Ohio to simply hopping on eBay and purchasing from your favorite video game power seller. And in 2022 here, I think there's a lot of misplaced anger that is going towards the game collecting hobby that is actually being directed towards the loss of a different hobby entirely. And that is the loss or the death of video game hunting, thrifting, garage sailing, whatever you want to call it. That aspect of collecting, if you want to call it that, has become incredibly competitive. Let's face it, we all love going out and getting something for nothing. That is a great dopamine hit. We all dream of the day where we walk into a thrift shop, pawn shop, and sitting there in a stack of NES games priced at $20, there's Nintendo World Championship just staring back at us. Hunting is fun and exciting because you never know what's going to be out there for you to find. For a lot of people, this is how they went about finding new games, and it really didn't cost them much at all because you generally get the games for pennies on the dollar. When I see people complaining these days about how bad collecting is, a lot of them mention that you can no longer go to stores or thrift shops or anywhere and get great deals. They're gonna blame the resellers, flippers, scalpers, and any other idiot who has a smartphone who is now capable of looking up prices in 2 seconds. These collectors are creating a persona for these other people who are going out there and stealing all the good deals, not realizing the irony of the situation. If you're out there, if you're hunting, if you're looking for great deals, if you happen to get a great deal, then you are that flipper, reseller, scalper to someone else. Collectors cannibalize other collectors. It's just how it is, and it's how it always has been. Especially now when video game collecting is as popular as it has ever been. If you're out there going to get deals, then you are part of the problem. Someone else is going to assume that you are the exact same reseller scum as you do when you see someone else out hunting. When in reality, it's a lot of collectors competing with each other, but it feels a lot better to blame someone else rather than blame yourself. Now, I'm not saying that the glorification of hunting and reselling and thrifting on YouTube and other social media sites haven't contributed to the issue. Of course, that's increased competition and it's made more people aware that they can go out and do this. But this is an inevitable outcome when we have a hobby that has sustained popularity and done nothing but grow in popularity over the years. But here comes the big bomb I'm gonna drop now. The act of going out thrifting and hunting and catching someone slipping and getting a great deal, that is not video game collecting. That is a different rush of dopamine. That is a different hobby almost entirely. That really does fall into the category of treasure hunting. It's kind of the same as if someone has a metal detector and is walking all over the beach. They're not necessarily a collector of the items that they find, but the items that they find might be valuable and therefore very rewarding to take part in the activity. Of course, there's a ton of overlap between people who go out and hunt for video games and people who collect video games. I understand that, but they aren't necessarily intertwined with each other. You can be a collector who never goes out and hunts. You can be a hunter who doesn't collect video games. If your only association with game collecting is going to local sales or on local Facebook groups and trying to find great deals, then it's not that the hobby of video game collecting has gotten any worse. It's that your hobby of video game hunting or thrifting has gotten a lot more competitive and is therefore no longer worth your time and no longer enjoyable. You have to understand that resellers face the exact same market competition that you do. The difference is they're going to put in a lot more time and dedication to the hunt itself because that is their hobby. Their hobby isn't collecting. Their hobby is hunting. Do I wish that I could still go out to my local Value Village and find an N64 and 7 games for $50? Of course I do. We all do. That would be awesome. And if you happen to be fortunate enough to be in the hobby 10, 20 years ago, that was a reality that existed because it was just far less popular. Unfortunately, now, and honestly for a long time, that if you want to be a video game hunter now, if hunting is your association with collecting, then you have to put in a lot of time with very little reward. Even when you complain about a reseller or someone always going out there and getting good deals, all you have to do is think about your own hunting. How often did you actually score deals when you went to your Value Village, your thrift shops, garage sales? How often did you just waste an entire day and really find nothing? Or maybe you found a few games underpriced, but for the most part, you're just doing it for the enjoyment. And that's the big thing, and why I really separate the hunting from the collecting. You can do the hunting without even really needing to buy anything, because the joy of going out and exploring and the chance that you might find something is a hobby all on its own. Then what you actually do with those items that you find is if you're collecting or not. I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way, that hunting simply isn't worth it anymore. The competition is drastically increased to the point where you're probably not going to find anything, and even if you do find something, the prices they're asking might just make it not even worthwhile anyway. Which brings me to the next huge point that everyone talks about: prices. Prices are too damn high now in video game collecting. So what I'm about to show you on screen here are actual video game purchases that I made locally back in 2012. October 2012, I purchased N64 console with 4 controllers and the games Turok, WWF No Mercy, Pokemon Puzzle League, Cruising the World, 1080 Snowboarding, Harvest Moon 64, Zelda Majora's Mask, and Mario 64 for a grand total price of $70. Play Fighter Sculptor's Cut, complete in box, was $750 back in 2012. Still pretty expensive, honestly. When you see that kind of pricing, you really have to put it into relativity of the time frame. Do I wish it was still possible to get these kinds of deals today? Of course I do. That would be awesome. But let's face it, price increases on almost anything are basically inevitable in the economy we live in. And just to give you a little bit more perspective, people in 2010 would complain about the prices being higher than they were in 2005. People in 2015 would complain that the prices are higher than they were in 2010. In 2019, we would complain about 2015. In 2022, we complain about 2019. No matter what the prices are, there is someone else that exists that has a different price relativity than you do. And therefore, they're going to complain when prices go up. Prices today are higher than they were for a lot of video games. That's undeniable. Especially speaking if we look at the collector games, you know, those same 100, 200 games that every single person feels like they need to own for some reason. If we look at those games specifically, then yeah, they've basically been on a steady incline for the past 10 to 20 years. Prices do, of course, go both ways though. As games become more expensive to buy, it also means that you're going to get more money for them if you go to sell. Unless you are literally just entering into the hobby now or within the past 6 months, then of course you have a collection behind you. It might be a small, mid, who knows, but you have games already in your collection that you could sell in order to purchase new games. Of course, it can be extremely hard to let go of the items that we already own. See my video on the endowment effect for more information about that. But like I said earlier, collecting is not a static hobby, and neither should your collection be. As you discover new things, as your life changes, as you have new interests, of course you should sell some of your older things that you're no longer as attached to bring new things into your collection so you can enjoy now. Do higher prices mean you get to collect less stuff in general? Of course it does. I have to budget and be far more selective with my purchases than I did 5 years ago, especially more than I had to 10 years ago. Even so, it's not like 5 or 10 years ago I could literally just go out and buy everything I wanted. Back then, $750 for a complete in-box Sculptor's Cut was absolute insanity. And if every other N64 game is selling for $20, $30, who the hell is gonna drop $700 on Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut? That is insanely overpriced. When we talk about prices and too high or too low, everyone has their own experiences and perceptions of what something should be worth. So many people say stuff like no used game should be worth more than it was originally at retail, which completely ignores all free market economics, but it illustrates my point that people are simply going to perceive things differently whether it's right or wrong. For myself, prices are neither high nor low at any given time. Prices just are what they are, and then it's up to me to decide if it's worth it for me to pay said price. Now, of course, it's still possible to be savvy and understand that fair market value on this game is X, so if I pay $50 under X, I'm getting a good deal. That's very easy for everyone to do. Albeit, there are still people who will look at a complete in-box Earthbound for $1,000, even though it routinely will sell for over $2,000, and they will scoff at the price and say that's ridiculous and not buy it. In which case, there's really no pleasing these people. In those instances, the complaints are fully just emotional rather than practical and rational to what's going on around you. And I get it. Many people just want to enjoy the hobby, go out and buy some stuff and not have to worry about being a market analyst all the time. Which you can still do, but then you also can't be shocked every time you walk into a game store and Silent Hill is now worth $150 when 2 years ago it was only 60 bucks. You don't have the right to be ignorant about actual market movements and then also be ignorant about the prices things are going for. The market will move with or without you, and it doesn't care if you agree with it or not. It's our job as collectors to decide if we want to continue supporting this market and buying items at these prices, or, like I said, begin selling some of your stuff into these prices. And you don't even have to cycle that money back into the hobby. After you sell some stuff, just take a step back and reevaluate if you even want to be a part of this ecosystem. Game collecting, hobbies, they're supposed to be fun. So if you only find yourself in negative, toxic mindset about it all, it's okay to just walk away. Are prices high on some things? Of course they are, but that is how it has always been. Dare I say something that might be controversial? If you could go out and buy any game at any time for $5, let's say, this hobby wouldn't be any fun. Part of the fun of collecting is the fact that you can't have everything and you never will have everything. That's what makes acquiring new stuff so exciting. That's what makes there be such a payoff when you finally acquire that rare game or that expensive game or that one that you've wanted for months or you've saved up for years. Going back to hunting for a second, that is why we have all spent endless hours walking around dirty thrift shops or useless junk sales. For that chance that we find one of the rare games or expensive games. We need varying prices within our ecosystem in order for the hobby to thrive and be fun. Here's another hot take for you regarding prices. Game collecting doesn't have to be expensive. You just want the same shit that everyone else wants. For example, on PS1, there are over 1,700 entries for games on pricecharting.com. Of those games, when I filtered from highest price to lowest price, I counted 77 of them that are over $100 for a complete in-box version. That's it. 77 of them. The vast majority of PS1 games are under $50. You could get most of them for under $20. However, so much negativity towards prices is focused around these select few games that are expensive that you'd think the PS1 only had 100 games released for it. This is where it becomes hard for me to emphasize with people when they start complaining about game prices. To put it quite frankly, go collect something else. There are literally tens of thousands of video games out there, and there is something for every collector at every budget level. Go discover a new console of games. Go discover a new niche or subgenre. Go discover a new publisher of games that you've never heard before. There's so much out there that I don't understand the fixation and the focus of looking at only these expensive games and then extrapolating it to the whole hobby as being overpriced. It's actually insane to me. If you yourself are trying to acquire the same games that are expensive and sought after, then you are part of the problem, and you cannot complain that the prices are high just because someone else is willing to pay said price when you are not. If we all want the same games and there's a finite amount of them available, prices of them have to go up. Like I said earlier, collectors cannibalize other collectors. If one collector has something, it means another collector doesn't. That is unfortunately how this hobby works. And as the hobby becomes more popular and more are getting swallowed up into people's collections and there are less available, the price only has one direction that it can go. If high prices are the reason as to why you want to quit game collecting, I really do implore you to try and find a new console to collect for, to try and go discover different types of games that people aren't talking about. There's just so much out there still to be discovered and talked about and enjoyed that I don't see any reason to get fixated or hung up that the price of certain titles is expensive. There are still so many amazing games out there that are dirt cheap regardless of what your budget is. And there is content and price guides and dedicated Facebook groups and Twitch and YouTube and so many other resources for you to get into these other games that aren't discovered yet. Coming into 2022, there has never been as many people enjoying and participating in the video game hobby from modern to vintage as there has ever been. You can turn on Twitch every day and go watch amazing feats being accomplished in video games, or you can go and search for random games and watch someone play live a game that you've never even heard of before. I don't feel like game collecting sucks in 2022. Not at all. I do, however, feel that there has been a shift from people who used to focus energy on actually enjoying the hobby to now just putting all of their attention and focus on the few negative aspects or negativity about the hobby and being as loud about it as possible. Resellers have always existed. Scalping has always been a thing. Grading video games has been a thing for over 10 years now. Prices on certain games have always been expensive and always been more expensive than other games. These aren't new things to video game collecting, and they aren't new things to collectible hobbies in general. Prices have changed, yes, and they're probably never going to go back to the 2018-2019 levels. This is the world we live in now. Much of what actually goes on in the macro economy, we can't control. What we can control, however, is how we adapt to these changes, how we react to these changes, and where we want to focus our time and energy. You can control your attitude towards everything that's taking place. For myself, video game collecting has been the same challenging, engaging, and rewarding hobby throughout 2021, and I expect it to be much of the same through 2022. If you find yourself no longer enjoying this hobby, I do encourage you to just take a step back and reevaluate why you even got into this hobby in the first place. If it's no longer for you, if you no longer find enjoyment, that's perfectly okay. Maybe you come back in 6 months or a year and you can find this hobby enjoyable again. Maybe just take some time to be a pure gamer again and not worry about the collecting aspect of the hobby. That's something that I honestly wish I did more myself. But hopefully if you do leave the hobby, you do come back to it again sometime, because it really is an awesome hobby. Make sure to put down in the comments how you yourself feel about the hobby these days, and have yourself a great rest of your day.